Thank you. I actually read that in your description as I was like getting this loaded up, and my first thought was like, oh, I don't have anything like that. And as I was saying that to a friend, it hit me, yes, you fucking do. And so this is a pretty big part that I left out of my little recap there on my life. But uh after getting married and going back to the Mormon church, right? I quickly get pregnant with my son. And I had back problems before. I had like herniated my discs, my lower lumbar discs in 2007. So in 2013, I have my son. And in April of 2014, on a Sunday, I'm taking a nap after church. My son's 6 months old. I wake up screaming in the worst pain I've ever felt in my life, like completely horrific. It was horrifying pain. And I realized I was paralyzed. And yeah, I'll try and tell this one without getting too weepy, but I'm still processing a lot of it, right? It's been 10 years. So um so it was really scary. And I realized that I also hadn't like urinated since the day before. And I realized very quickly that I couldn't. And I'm like yelling for my husband, and he comes in, and we can't get me up. It's just too much pain. The only thing that I couldn't sit, I couldn't stand. I was just like on all fours. And it took about 15 minutes to get to the garage to get me in the car to get to the ER. And unfortunately, I made the mistake of saying that I had chronic back pain, and pretty quickly they tagged me as like drug seeking. And I learned how to advocate for myself through the next 3 days. They sent me home with the shot of diazepam, still hadn't urinated. As I'm like sleeping that shit off, I wake up about midnight and I start Googling it because it still was the same and the pain was back, right? Start Googling it, and I'm like, I wake my husband up. I'm like, we got to go. I think this is something very serious and we've got to go. It's an emergency. And so we do it again, get back in the car. I ride all fours for an hour. So I'm in rural Georgia. I ride all fours for an hour to the next hospital. And same story, except this time they were corroborating what the other ER said, which was, we think it's a kidney stone. And I told both of them, it's not a kidney stone. I've had kidney stones. This is not that. Well, we think that's what it is. And we got to get you in for a scan. So somebody finally cast me, finally get cast, go in the scan, come back out. It's not a kidney stone. We don't know. And sorry. Like literally, it was just another discharge at 8 in the morning. But the reason we had chosen that hospital was because I think this is part of the miracle. It was because I had an appointment with a neurosurgeon there 4 days from then. I would have been going because I had noticed that something in my back had started. My foot was starting to drag, right? So there were signs that something was wrong. And I had been calling since March, and they couldn't have got me in until April 10th. So here we are on April 6th. This has happened. And so we went to that hospital because that's where he was. And I called them and said, this is what's going on. I'm at my second ER. I'm downstairs. Can we please get me in today? And they were like, we can't. But since you're here, we can do x-rays. So just go around this corner and you can do the x-rays. So we go around this corner, and my husband's pushing me. And I look up and I see this doctor. Now, I'd only looked at the website like one time, but I look up and I say, that's the surgeon. And like I pointed at him, we're in this back room. There's nobody else in this hallway, and he's coming down. He's all scrubbed up. And I said, that's the surgeon. Stop, stop, stop. So I stopped and I said, look, my name's Kyleigh. This is what's going on. I'm supposed to be. He says, come back at 1 o'clock. And so I remember we went to Barnes and Noble, which I think is so funny. And we bought the book Boss Baby before it was a movie, and that became my son's book. And so anyway, we go back at 1 o'clock. Within 5 minutes, he comes in and says, you have a really rare thing called Cauda equina syndrome. And that's what I had Googled. And he says, this is an emergency and you will be paralyzed if we don't get you in right now. Unfortunately, they weren't just okay with the MRIs that I had in January, which he told me you should have had surgery back then. And so they wanted to also get a myelogram. And so that meant another day. And so got the myelogram. They finally get me in for surgery. He says it looked like a grenade had just gone off. There were disc pieces everywhere. And the cauda equina is like the end of your spinal cord. It's like a tail. It's like all the nerves, right? So to the very base. And so what had happened was, what had happened was the discs landed on that. And so it shut everything down. And so they were able to clean it out and get everything out. But because so many hours had passed, it was about 65, 70 hours at this point, I had permanent nerve damage in my right leg and my right foot, and still so much pain. It fixed the problem, but everything was really whack. And like urinating became, it was very difficult. It changed sex. Everything was hard. And they basically said, like, it's going to be a really long, long, long recovery. And whatever feeling you get back, like around the 18-month mark, that's probably going to be the best you get. So grief, so much grief. I have a 6-month-old, you know? So the amazing part is, it was a really hard road, and, you know, I was fortunate that I got medically retired from my government job. I worked at the VA hospital as a recreation therapist. I loved it. I was an athlete. I loved playing sports. I was really excited to be like this active mom with my son. But that was that. I was done. I couldn't, I was in a wheelchair for a while. I had a cane for a long time, a scooter. And then finally in 2017, it was like, there's got to be something else. Like, this is not a life. Or it wasn't for me. And I know now a lot of those because I just wouldn't accept it. I was so busted up. And on so much medication. I was on so much medication. So they tell me about this thing called a spinal cord stimulator, and that it will trick the nerve damage. It will trick the pain signal from my brain, and basically it will help my leg pain, which just feels like constant fire. Like, that's what, right? So I get this thing. We did a GoFundMe. Honestly, if you Googled me, you might still see it. We did it, like a friend did a GoFundMe, and we were able to raise it, and it was amazing. And at this point, we were very poor students. We had decided to get my husband back into school. We had moved back out to Idaho, went to BYU, Idaho. He was going to do that. And I'm at home with the toddler and just in bed a lot, and I'm in a lot of pain. And so the spinal cord stimulator helped, but it still wasn't like, it didn't do what we thought it would. So within 6 months, then I had implanted a pain pump. And so this pain pump has a catheter that goes right into my spinal cord. And so then they have in my pain pump, like Dilaudid or hydromorphone goes directly into that area. So that is what I say got me back up on my feet. Like, the pain pump kind of gave me a like semblance of like ability again. But the problem then became is now I'm this like able-bodied person with this chronic shit, and just not, you know, not really wanting to talk about it a lot, right? But also not being able to explain like why it wasn't working, or like just so much shame, so much grief. And so the 9-year mark rolled around last 2023, and every time, because it rolls up on my Facebook, I start complaining in January. By February, I'm like, what's wrong? By March, I'm like, this neurosurgeon won't get me in. Like, you see it. And so always at the beginning of a year, it would just creep on. And I made the decision last April, that last 2023, I don't want to feel this way at the 10-year mark. Like, I refuse to feel this way, because I knew how it had impacted my life. And I also knew that the way that I was feeling about it was impacting my life and creating further loss. And so in 2024, January, I read this book, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. And I read the first 3 pages, and it just clicks. And I put that book down and I start practicing it, listening to the other voice, just listening and observing. And it just clicked. All of my training, I had done the attachment certification back in 2022. I've been in mental health since I graduated college. Like, I do nonviolent communication. I do like all of that, the conflict, but this piece clicked it all and made it just like, this is it. And it changed my life immediately. Like, I'm not kidding, immediately. Within a week, I was having a very healing conversation with my parents, like practicing this new way of speaking. I began calling what I used to call my bad leg God, I started calling it my healing leg. And I started noticing a shift in my pain. So
Wow.
um yeah, the miracle of that being that I would have knocked somebody out if it said to me, you know, your thoughts have so much to do with this. And I'm not saying that I am like it's gone, right? They just told me a month ago I need to have a fusion. Like it's time for that. They told me that 10 years ago and I said not at 30. And they told me a month ago and I'm saying not at 40. It's not that it's just magically healed, but the way I think and feel about it is healed. And the pain is just different. It's just different. And I coached my son's baseball team the last 2 seasons.
That's amazing. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
And I started my business. I started my business because I'm like, I don't want to live this way, right? And I don't have to choose to live this way. And if I can choose to accept what happened to me, it's not that you let it go. It's just that like it can be sad and you can keep living and not losing, And it's just shifted everything. 2024 has been the most healing year of my life after what has felt like 10 years of being paralyzed by this pain and what happened.
Wow. I have to tell you that that book, I've had it forever and I haven't read
Please
it
read it.
yet.
Please read it. I recommend it to everyone. I tell people actually that 2 months after that shift, I ended up picking the book back up because I was like, I never finished it. I just got like blown away by the first 3 pages. And that book was now a testimonial of what my life had just been. Like this, like I was doing it. And it was, and as someone who's like always fighting to like, I'm not doing things right or wrong. It was like a very like, this is what my life feels and looks like now. And I've been coaching it, right? I've been coaching all of the attachment, all of it is now this like beautiful thing that I've been able to gift to other members of this queer community that wildly effective. Hell yeah, it's wildly effective. I know. I know.
I have to ask, what is on the first 3 pages?
Well, I mean, it's just where he kind of talks about like, it's not, I think it's the introduction, even worse. But he just talks about this idea of like self and like if we're listening. No, here it is. Chapter 1, The Voice Inside Your Head. I am not about to read you this book, but he just talks about like when you're thinking about things, sometimes you'll notice there's this voice or this story going off, and you're like, he basically asks, who is that? Like, it's not you because you're listening. So, what is that? And it just clicked for me because I'd already been doing parts work, right? Internal family system. I'd already been doing parts work. I'd already kind of made contact with this like idea of an inner child and an inner teenager. And I have this imposter and I have this other part that I call the gram processor. Like she's very pompous, right? Like I have these parts that I know are part of me and that I was just trying to move on from. And really it's about integration, right? And so when I was able to like click with this idea of like there are stories going off all the time in my head. And if I instead, what I tell people is like, instead of being judgmental, be curious. Like, just be fucking like I say, Nancy drew the fuck out of it. Like, literally, just be like, what is that about? Like, what? Right? Like, I made a post the other day on Instagram. Basically, this idea. You hear people say all the time, like, why am I like this? Like, why am I like this? And my thought was like, yo, you just flip the tone on that, and it's an entirely different experience. Like, critical tone, why am I like this? Curious tone, why am I like this? Right? Same fucking words, different intention, and it's going to send different experiences through you. It just will because our thoughts are really powerful.